right. I think we should start. So welcome everyone to today's Cloudinary Cafe session, where I'll be going through how to master Cloudinary's universal API block in media flows. I'm Thomas. I am a developer support engineer here at Cloudinary. So before we begin, some training guidelines and best practices I want to mention. So please give this your full focus. The whole session is only about 20 minutes, even less. Please engage and ask questions, as mentioned earlier. Take notes on what matters to you. Use what you learn right away. And most importantly, have fun. All right, so let's begin. Story time. So in this use case, we have a customer where he has a website where he displays user-generated content on his website using Cloudinary's product gallery widget with the tag approved. So anytime someone adds the approved tag in an asset, it automatically renders in the website. However, since the content comes from end users, he needs to make sure the assets are moderated. So he puts them through Amazon's recognition add-on provided by Cloudinary. And based on the result of the add-on, he manually types the approved tag, as you can see here, and then which translates to the website here. So one day he wondered this task was getting very repetitive and consuming a lot of time, and if he could automate it. So he thought about various ways he could tackle this problem. Of course, he could build his own solution using existing Cloudinary APIs, but this would mean he'd need to run his application locally or somewhere in the cloud, and he would need to maintain it himself. So he looked at media flows, and in media flows, you can basically use no code and trigger the AWS recognition moderation. And based on the response, the media flows automatically adds a tag. He checked media flows and he found a block for image moderation, which resolved the issue for automatically moderating images and adding the tag. But he couldn't find any blocks for AWS video recognition add-on. And this is when he discovered the universal API block, which allows him to access any Cloudinary API that's available. So for videos, what's he going to do is he's going to create two flows. One flow will trigger the add-on, and the other flow will receive the webhook from the flow that triggers the add-on. And then based on the response of the add-on, it will apply the approved tag. Okay, now let's demo. So here, I'll quickly go through the image flow right now. So this flow handles all images that's uploaded to his website. So first you have the Cloudinary upload trigger, which is only set to trigger when you upload an image. Once an image is uploaded, it goes through the moderate image block, which is the dedicated block we already have for using Amazon's recognition add-on for images. And these are the default parameters for confidence level and categories. You can please feel free to change them if you need to. Once the moderation is complete, we have an if condition check, which checks if the moderation status is approved. If it is, it will add the approved tag. If not, it's just going to add an extra log, which may be useful for you later on when you manually review cases where the assets have been falsely moderated, which can happen. So this is the image moderation flow, which is very simple. Now for the video flow, this is what he has. You have the usual Cloudinary upload trigger, which is set to trigger for videos only. Then this is when he uses the universal API, as there isn't a dedicated block for AWS Rec Video. And as you can see, this is how the universal API works. So at first, you need to specify the API namespace you want to use. In this example, we are using the Explicit API, which is part of the upload API. So the namespace is uploader. And the way universal API works is you need to provide all the parameters in a JSON payload. And as you can see here, so first you specify the method. In this case, it's explicit. And all the required and optional parameters, they need to go under the parameters object. And all the required parameters, you need to pass them on their own object. So in this case, explicit requires public ID, and this has to go to its own object called 0. And any other required optional parameters can be passed in the next object called 1, where I'm including type, resource type, moderation, and notification URL. And these increment if you have more required types. And I'll quickly show you some other examples as well. I would encourage you to read our docs. They're very good and they provide loads of examples. So if you look at this example, this is a method with no required parameters, only options. And this is using the utils space. So if I go back here, then you can see the utils namespace, which is used by generate archive. And a quick note and a hack, Media Flows uses the Node.js SDK in the backend. So if you're unsure of what syntax to use, you can always refer to the Node.js example in our docs and use that to build your JSON payload. So in this example, you can see the method is download zip URL. And since this method doesn't require any required parameters, you just pass all the optional parameters under one object called 0. In example 2, this is also a very good example. This is a method which requires 2 positional parameters and options. So this is using the resources by moderation API, which is part of the admin API. You can see here. So the namespaces API. And if I quickly view this API, you can see there's 2 required parameters, moderation kind and status, which is why in this example, you can see the moderation kind is passed on its own object called 0. The status is on another object called 1, rejected. And finally, all the other options can be included in the final object called 2, where in this example, it's specifying the direction and tags. Hopefully that gives you a good idea on how you can build a JSON payload for your universal API call. Now going back to the example. So now if you notice, I have specified a notification URL here. Obviously, the moderation is the important bit as well. This is where the video moderation add-on is triggered. But since video moderation add-on is async by nature, what happens is initially you will get a pending response. And if you have a notification URL specified, Cloudinary will send the final output to whatever notification URL you defined. And if you notice the notification URL here, it's hooks.mediaflow.com domain. So this basically is triggering the final flow, which I call it the webhook catcher. So this is listening to the moderation result for videos, and the URL can simply be extracted from this block right here. So if I show this, and basically you copy this, you go back to your flow and you specify it here. So what happens is once the moderation is complete, Cloudinary sends the webhook to this URL, which in turn triggers this flow. So now I'll go through this flow. So when the flow comes in, I'm exposing these 3 fields: notification type, moderation status, and asset ID, which I'll need to use it later. So the first thing I do is I check if the notification type is moderation. This is important because for a single upload, you can actually receive multiple notifications. So if I show you this example I ran before the session. So for this upload, I received 3 different types of notifications. The first one is called clip. If I go to the moderation notification type, info, sorry. And the second one is called moderation notification type. So this is the one we want to focus on. And finally, the upload type notification. So the one we only want is this one, moderation. And in this if check, that's what I'm doing. So I'm making sure the notification type is moderation. And if it is, then you move to the next check, which is to check if the moderation status is approved. And when this is approved, then it goes to the subsequent step where it adds the approved tag. Now, if you noticed, I'm using Universal API again here. And the reason for this is because the webhook notification for moderation, it doesn't include the delivery type or the resource type. It only includes the public ID. And now if you want to make this flow to work for any types of asset, then we need to make sure we get the right delivery type. Resource type isn't much of a problem because we know this is just for videos. So what I do instead is I use the asset ID that I receive from the webhook, and this is included in the webhook. So as you can see, the asset ID is right here in this sample response, and there's no delivery type or resource type. So using the asset ID, I trigger the resource by asset ID admin API, which is part of the admin API. So the namespace will be API. And I simply call the asset ID, which I expose right here in the first block. Now this will give me all the information of this asset and all this information, which in turn I expose it over here. So I'm exposing public ID type and resource type. And finally, this is used by the add approved tag block. So you can see here, public ID type, resource type, and you finally add the approved tag. So this way, no matter what type of asset you upload, may it be authenticated or private, this flow is going to work. Okay, now let's run a demo. So in this demo, I'm just going to run the test from here within media flows, but you can always run the test from the media library UI or any other integration you have with Cloudinary. So you can, this is the test asset I'm using. So actually, I don't need to run the test for this flow because this flow will get automatically triggered by the invoker flow video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. So this is the video I'm going to use for this test. I'm going to run the test here and open the live logs. So important to note that you'll only see live logs if you have the flow open. If you don't see it in the live logs, then rest assured, like all the logs will go to history logs. Okay, this flow ran successfully. Now, if I look at the data, this is the asset I uploaded, the dog video. And after the upload, it went through the universal API block, which triggered the AWS rec video moderation, and the status is pending. So now once the moderation is complete, it'll automatically send the output, the result to this notification, which will then in turn trigger this. Videos do take longer to moderate. So while this is running, I will quickly test the flow for image as well. Same thing. I'm going to be using this test image here. I'm going to run the test now. Images are much faster and they get approved instantly. So while this is loading, okay, that's finished. So now you can see that's the test asset I uploaded and the moderation results. So it was approved. And finally, the bit where I add the tag. Okay, so this was successfully done. Now let's go back to the AWS rec. So this still hasn't completed. So once the moderation is complete, then, just now as we speak, this is completed. Now, if I open this, you can see we received the results here. So the moderation notification type was moderation. So it passed the first check. Then the moderation status is approved. So it passed the second check as well, which is why it ran the get asset delivery and resource type universal block. So in this block, I'm basically getting the delivery type and resource type right here. And finally, with the approved message, and finally, the approved tag gets added. Now, if I go to the moderation UI, my media library UI, and refresh it, I should see those two images appear here, the dog video and the image of the woman with the hat. And the approved tag has been added. Same here. Now, if I go to my sample UGC site, if I refresh this page, I should see both those videos here. And image, sorry. So there you go, the image is there, and the dog video came down here. And you can play it as well. You can view the source code for this here, just by clicking view source code, and I will share this later on as well. This is basically using product gallery widget, and this is set to extract any asset with the approved tag for images and videos. I'll go back to viewing this full page. So yeah, so this is how the customer solved this use case. And hopefully this has helped you on how to properly use Universal API as well. Going back to the slide. So to summarize, the customer created two flows. One just for images, which is using the built-in moderation image block. And second, for videos, which uses the Universal API block to trigger the video moderation, which in turn triggers the catch webhook flow, which then analyzes the data and then adds approved tag to the asset. Additional notes. So as I mentioned earlier, media flows uses Node.js SDK on the backend. So please follow the Node.js syntax if you ever get stuck. Also important to note, if you're using string variables in JSON fields with curly braces within media flows, they must be escaped. I'll link the docs to this as well. This is because the media flows uses curly braces to use dynamic parameters, so it clashes. And finally, for AWS recognition, you can view all the assets that were moderated within the Cloudinary UI as well. I'll quickly show you how to do that. So if I go to my UI page, you go on to moderation and you switch the moderation type to recognition and go to approved. So you can see this was the image that was automatically approved. So if you do need to override the automatic moderation, then you can always come here and do it. Same for videos. You switch to the video tag. And this was the video I tested earlier. Improvements. So there is a way the customer can streamline this process even more. Instead of having two separate flows, one for videos and images, he can actually just create an upload preset that triggers both the image and the video add-ons for moderation. And then in the notification URL, you define the URL you have for the catch webhook flow. So this way, anytime you upload something that's using this upload preset, it will automatically fire the moderation response to this webhook, which will trigger the catch webhook flow. And then based on the result, it will add the approved tag. And if you can take it a step further by setting this add-on as the default preset for all your images and videos uploads for API and media library, this way, every single upload will automatically go through moderation process and you'll only need one flow that way. So all the resources are linked here. We'll share this as well after the session. I hope this session was very useful for you and it taught you how to use Universal API block properly and how you can harness its power. So you don't really need a specific block to use media flows and connect to Cloudinary's APIs. And I hope you test it after as well. Thank you.